Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third episode in our three-part series. We are so excited that you are joining us and tuning in through whatever listening method you chose. This is Igniting Lifelong Literacy, a Chippewa River Writing Project approach. Before we get started with the content today, I'd like to read our land acknowledgement.
The Chippewa River Writing Project is based at Central Michigan University, located in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Founded in 1892 as Central Michigan Normal School, CMU is located on the ancestral grounds of the Council of Three Fires, the Anishinaabe, of whom the Saginaw Chippewa Nation is one. Seated under duress in the 1855 and 1864 treaties, this land was named the Isabella Indian Reservation and remains part of the homeland of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe. It is our responsibility to care for this land and its people, and to be intentional and inclusive in our work. We recognize that this acknowledgement is only meaningful when combined with purposeful actions and genuine relationships that honor the land and its people. These actions include abdicating for the histories, cultures, languages, and the territorial rights of historic Indigenous peoples. As our writing project grows to include members from outside Mount Pleasant, we invite all CRWP members to recognize their own connection to the lands on which they reside and honor their own responsibilities to the original keepers of those lands.
And in case you forgot, I'm just one of the hosts of this podcast. My name is Becky Schwartz, and my partner in crime, so to speak, is Lyndsay Young. If you want to know more about us, we encourage you to listen to the early episodes in this season, particularly our introduction episode and episode 1, where we talk a lot about our background and kind of our history together. But before we dive right into the meat of this episode, which I'm going to turn this over to Lyndsay, I just wanted to take a second and thank you, listener, for kind of embracing us on this journey and listening this far. Lyndsay and I are very humbled, and we appreciate the fact that we have made it 3-4 episodes into this podcast. So thank you for learning along with us. We really appreciate this. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Lyndsay and let her kind of do what she does phenomenally, which is teach us about these literacy approaches.
Thank you, Becky. So today we will begin the third episode in our 3-part series, last episode, I should say, in our 3-part series on the very hot topic in literacy. And again, especially in early literacy, but again, it's not just early literacy. This affects K through high school, science of reading versus balanced literacy. So today's episode will focus on comparing both approaches and how both can be used in our classrooms. Then again, that end of the kind of podcast, which is my favorite part, where we all get to discuss how these kind of ideas and these approaches affect us in the classroom. So these two approaches to teaching and reading are similar and different. So supported by years of research in psychology and cognitive science, science of reading and balanced literacy promotes obviously the 5 components effective reading instruction, which we know are phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. Also, both approaches stress the importance of high-quality, authentic text and large classroom libraries with various genres and levels for all readers. And I'm going to say amen to that one because, oh my gosh, that is so important to have a variety of text for all readers. So that is crucial in both approaches. So let's get into now kind of the differences with the approaches. So researchers in literacy instruction agree that teaching phonics systematically and explicitly is crucial to successful literacy instruction. Even though both approaches stress this, science of reading focuses on all the skills needed to become a proficient reader, including spoken language, spelling, and writing, background knowledge, and fluency. The balanced literacy approach encourages constant exposure to high-quality books. While this approach does teach some phonics, it primarily teaches students to figure out words by using MSV. And in case you don't know what that means, meaning, sentence structure, and visual information. So they more focus on in text rather than that specific, explicit taught phonics instruction. Furthermore, balanced literacy supports decoding through 3 strategies: using the meaning clues like pictures and surrounding stories to inform a guess, using syntax or grammar clues. What would it, or like, does it sound right? Would it be past tense, verb tense, for example, to inform a guess? Or using the letters and letter patterns to sound out the word. So, signs of reading supports decoding through letter sound patterns as their primary word reading strategy. When phonics are systematically and explicitly taught, that letter sound strategy works with increasing and lasting power. So in balanced literacy, small group instruction includes students using books with repeated words, predictable sentence structures, and pictures. In the science of reading, you might see small group instruction, including students using books that contain high-frequency words and sounds of students, the sounds of students already known, and repetition of certain sounds that students are learning. Now, many of you are probably asking the big, age-old question: which is better? Which approach is the best? Science of reading, balanced literacy. But what if I told you these approaches can actually be blended together? A resource I have found to be extremely helpful with this very concept is Shifting the Balance: 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into Balanced Literacy Classroom by Jan Birkins and Carrie Yates. The text highlights shifts that can be implemented in your classroom to best support your students in reading, utilizing obviously both approaches. So first, it's going to tell you to identify a common instructional practice to reconsider, such as comprehension, phonemic awareness, phonics, high-frequency words, 3 cueing system, which, in case you don't know what that is identifying words by meaning, like context clues, pictures, structure, which is the word order, and visual letter patterns, or misunderstandings of instructional approaches. And then it's going to be followed by that scientific research to support its reconsideration. Then it's going to propose an instructional shift, which details that include research based on instructional routines to support implementation of that shift. So I'm going to give you an example of what this would look like if you were to implement this into your classroom. So a teaching practice that you may reconsider is phonics through the incidental teaching of sound spelling patterns. Like pointing out 8 or through in the Very Hungry Caterpillar, then putting 8 under the header A on the word wall. Research supports reading comprehension is the product of decoding and language comprehension, or RC equals D times LC. Learning to read for understanding requires sounding out and recognizing words, decoding, but it also requires making meaning of words and sentences we hear. Obviously, that's language comprehension. So also systematic and explicit phonics instruction is effective for all students and especially critical for some. Then we get into the new instructional approach. So instead, we should see a dedicated portion of the literacy block where phonics is taught clearly and not just incidentally in a book. Students should be engaged in word work activities that help students inquire and discover how the silent E works and practice through both reading and writing that applies that silent E skills. Furthermore, incorporating a sound wall instead of a word wall, for example, could be helpful for students to see what this looks like. So instead of a header having an A, it could have 8. Having an A have that sound 8, and then words that have 8 in it underneath, having that same spelling pattern. Now we are at the portion of the podcast which is my absolute favorite part, which is the discussion. So again, we have our very special guest that will help give perspective on this topic from the role of a middle school language arts teacher. So let me reintroduce Jenny Sanford. So Jenny, what are your thoughts or takeaways on this topic?
Hey, let me just briefly interrupt here as sort of an editor's note. As I was going through this episode and editing it, Jenny starts talking about the same book that she's talked about in the last 2 episodes, and it is the same book that Lyndsay was talking about previously in her content. And that again is the book called Shifting the Balance: 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into the Balanced Literacy Classroom by Birkins and Yates. And without further ado, back to our regular scheduled content.
I think my biggest takeaway from this book is the idea of avoiding the swinging pendulum that we end up with in education. The whole idea of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I think in literacy, we sometimes are the worst about it, where a new idea pops up or a new idea is repackaged and everybody kind of jumps on board with that. And I like this book for the measured approach it takes between the two balanced literacy and reading, the science of reading, that it takes kind of a measured approach between the two of them. It actually kind of makes me think of another book that I've read, Visible Learning for Literacy, Fisher and Fry, where they use Hattie's research to talk about literacy practices, and it's all based into the effect size, things that are high effect sizes in his research, and how to really pull out those different strategies in the classroom. And I think the biggest thing, I'm kind of cheating this because I was supposed to pick one big takeaway, but I think the biggest thing is just that we've got to be responsive to our students and what their needs are. And if you're being responsive to student needs in the classroom, most likely you're going to be teaching with some good, measured practices.
That's okay. Totally cheat all you want and give us as much as you can because it's been so helpful so far. So our second question is, how could this information influence your practices as a middle school educator, and how could this be used to help other colleagues?
For me, one of the things as a middle school teacher and thinking about this book is it's a good reminder to attend to foundational skills and needs of my students, that just because foundational skills, for the most part, are mastered in elementary school, there's often gaps. I think even before COVID, we were seeing gaps at times in kids' comprehension and foundational skills. So it's just a good reminder to make sure that I'm balancing what I'm doing, what I'm teaching in the classroom with some of those foundational skills. But I think it's also important to understand that balanced literacy is not the same as whole language instruction. Sometimes they get kind of lumped in together. Balanced literacy is about providing, as it says in its name, a balance of instruction for students. So it's focused on whole group mini lessons, small group work, independent work, doing some shared reading and writing and things like that. So it is very different from that. But I think what science of reading brings in is that focus on those particular foundational skills and how those develop over time or don't develop over time, and being aware of that. One of the things that I have done this fall with my 7th grade students is I actually had them all record themselves reading a couple pages of their independent reading book on Flipgrid so that I can evaluate their fluency. I think it's important that even as the kids move up through school that we're still thinking about those things. And then, I'm also concerned about making sure that I'm providing, along with the instruction in some of these areas, also that they're getting the extended time for reading and writing work, because the reality is the further they get on in school, the more reading and writing work they're going to need to be able to do, the more sustained time, particularly with reading tasks across the entire curriculum when they get into high school and then especially college, that students are going to need to be able to do. So I really want to make sure I'm providing the instruction and those skills to be able to do that, but then also giving them that time in the classroom to be able to do that work independently.
Jenny, I'm going to kind of piggyback a lot on what you said right here in the last few minutes. As we've worked on these episodes, kind of the biggest takeaway for me is the importance of knowing how each of these approaches work and having skills from both camps kind of at the ready. A lot of times the struggling readers I'm working with in my classes need elements of both of these approaches to be successful in high school. And for me, the more tricks you have in the bag that you can pull out at a whim is really, really important. I think one of the things that is really harmful is deciding to be all or one or the other, because we've known for years that there is no silver bullet in education. And I might be stepping on some toes here because I'm not an elementary teacher and I have never taught reading at such a foundational level like this. And I understand that having training in both of these camps and be able to do it well in both camps is a lot of work. And we already, as teachers, no matter the level, do enough work, more work than we probably need to be doing. And sometimes, and especially if that work is going completely unpaid. But I think it's more of having a need of training in both approaches. It's more work, but the value it gives to the teacher's instruction if you can see a reader that's struggling with one approach, trying pieces of another approach doesn't mean you failed or the student has failed. It just means differentiating that instruction. And I think that is so incredibly important. But I'm going to switch gears here for a second and kind of think about the takeaways for the secondary level. And I think a lot about our Common Core state standards. That's what we use here in Michigan, and looking at them, they have a huge focus on the foundational documents such as the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, famous speeches throughout history, Shakespeare, and lots of high level of informational texts in the sciences especially. We know our students struggle with them, especially with the historical and the older works, because the language is fluid and adaptable, and it's a creation of society. We don't talk like we did when Hamilton was writing, or when Shakespeare was writing, or when Emily Dickinson was writing. And I think about the importance of vocabulary and going back to word recognition strategies with root words as well as context clues. This can help with words like, for example, erroneous. But combining these techniques with phonics in mini lessons and practice in my classroom when needed has helped a lot. Maybe because I was taught to read with Hooked on Phonics, but I really think big words need to be sounded out. Words like opulent and venerable can trip them up, but knowing how to sound them out helps. But over time, the more and more exposure that they get pushes kids up the reading ladders with both choice texts and whole class novels. And you can get them there to these difficult words that they may not encounter in their day-to-day speaking with other people. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox here and turn this over to Lyndsay. So Lyndsay, go ahead and kind of give us your takeaways on this information and how it applies to kind of the elementary lens.
So one major takeaway for me as an elementary school teacher that teaches language arts from the information on both approaches is that I do truly believe that these two approaches can be blended together. So for every educator, the most crucial component before implementing anything into your classroom is to do the research and know the research. So asking questions like, is it based on best practice? What studies have been done? What were the results? What evidence is there to support what you're doing makes you feel more confident and prepared as a teacher. So when you don't know what you're doing is based on best practice, or if you don't know if it's based on research, it makes you feel anxious and less confident with what you're doing with your students. So I think it's huge that these two approaches can be, again, blended together, and they are based on best practice. So that's why I think this novel, the blending together of balanced literacy and science of reading, this integration together, I think is huge, because teachers will find out what they're already doing is based on best practice, is based on research. There might just be a few tweaks that you need to make in your classroom, which again, you're always changing things in your classroom. So that is nothing new for an educator to change something. So I just think overall that this is really awesome that these two approaches can be blended together. It's not doing something totally new. Stuff you're already doing is best practice and what's right. But there may be things that you need to shift towards, shifting the balance. So shifting towards to do what's right for students, to do what's best practice, to do what's based on research. So how could this information influence my teaching practice as an elementary teacher? Or how can this be used to help out my colleagues? So I know many educators that are hesitant to learn more about science of reading because they believe this is going to completely change what they're already doing in their classroom. But presenting this idea of this blend of science of reading and balanced literacy, I truly feel could help educators feel more comfortable with this overwhelming feeling of this new idea. So also by using the approach presented in Shifting the Balance, 6 Ways to Bring Science of Reading into Balanced Literacy Classrooms, the shift could be done as a grade level department. I think that's just the best way of doing anything, because you have each other to check to make sure things are being done consistency and with fidelity. By implementing these changes as a grade level department, there's more support, collaboration, consistency, validity, all of those things. Because I feel like when teachers take things on their own, it can feel so overwhelming that in the end, it just doesn't go as well as it could. And then you stop doing it, right? So when I feel that things are done or these new ideas are implemented as a grade level and you have each other to support each other, I think it'll be done again, more consistency with fidelity. And I think then you have each other to kind of talk about and discuss those things that worked and didn't work, right? So being collaborative with this process and this change, I think will be better overall. So again, that could be good for helping each other. So I really think this idea of this kind of shift towards bringing that balanced literacy and science of reading together should be done as a grade level and could truly, I think, help teachers to see that this isn't a new idea. This isn't a brand new thing. It really is just tweaking and shifting things in your classroom to best help your students and to meet the needs of, like every student in your classroom.
I think you have heard that echoed in all of our reflections, kind of the importance of really, really trying to do the best we can to reach all of our students and help meet their needs where they are, to kind of keep pushing them forward on the lifelong journey that is literacy. But thanks, Lyndsay, for the great background on these approaches. And thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us on all 3 of these episodes in order to kind of give us that middle school and that literacy expert perspective throughout this season. This has been really fascinating to listen to, and I learned a lot from both of you in our shared research on this topic. And as we culminated these episodes and kind of planned them out, it has been really, really informative for me because, again, my background is not on early literacy, and I can tell you that I have learned so much, and it has changed a lot of the way that I think about certain complications that come up with teaching reading at the high school level. So thank you for that. And also thank you so much for listening to us today and the other days that you have listened to us throughout the season. We've so appreciated learning with you and having this opportunity and this platform to kind of discuss this really complex issue in education. For our next episode, we're going to try to wrap up the school year with ideas for both reflection and self-care over the summer in a way that's not gaslighting and telling you that this is how you should take care of yourself and to stop working so hard, because we are also people who don't really particularly stop during the summer. It just looks very, very differently what we're doing in forms of education work. But we are going to also take a break after that episode and kind of work on researching and ideas for the next season that we're going to bring you in the fall of 2024. So see what I mean about what we do just looks very differently in the world of education during our summer breaks. But part of the reason we are taking this break is because we want to hear from you. What do you want us to talk about next? What would you like us to tackle? What would best help you to learn with us and alongside of us? So reach out to us anytime through the email ignite CRWP podcast 383 at gmail.com. That is ignite, IGNITE CRWP podcast 383 at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter through the Chippewa River Writing Project's pages. We are at Chippewa River WP. Fire up and see you soon.